In the spring of 1984, someone in Japan decided to go to war with the country's biggest candy companies. Not with bombs, not with a clear and reasonable demand, but with something far more unsettling. A string of theatrical letters, each signed with the name of a fictional villain from a children's novel. They kidnapped a CEO. They set buildings on fire. They placed cyanide-laced candy on supermarket shelves where families shopped with their children. And they spent 17 months making an entire nation afraid to eat a chocolate bar. They were never caught. This is the story of the Glico Morinaga case and the monster with 21 faces. It was the evening of March 18, 1984, in a quiet, affluent neighborhood of Nishinomiya just outside Kobe. Two men in masks arrived at the home of a 65-year-old woman named Setsuko Ezaki. They forced their way in, took the key to her son's house next door, and left her bound and terrified. Her son was Katsuhisa Ezaki, 50 years old, president of Ezaki Glico, one of Japan's most iconic confectionery companies, the maker of Pocky Pretz and the caramel treat that had been on the market since 1922. He was bathing with his children when the men entered. They were armed. Accounts describe a handgun and a rifle. They tied up his wife Mikiko and his eldest daughter Mariko and locked them in the bathroom. Then they walked Katsuhisa Ezaki out of his own home in the dark. They took him to a warehouse somewhere in Osaka and issued their demand, 1 billion yen, roughly $4 million at the time, plus 100 pounds of gold. His family gathered what they could. A ransom drop point was designated. The kidnappers never showed up to collect it. 3 days later, on March 21st, Katsuhisa Ezaki escaped from the warehouse. He was found shaken but physically unharmed. No ransom had been paid. No suspects had been identified. The case should, in theory, have closed there. It didn't. On April 10th, arsonists torched a fleet of vehicles parked outside the Glico headquarters in Osaka. Then, on May the 10th, Glico received a letter. The authors claimed they had already placed potassium cyanide inside the company's candy products. They dared Glico to tell the public, and they signed the letter. Monster with 21 faces. Glico had no choice. They pulled every product from every shelf in the country. Production was suspended across plants in Osaka, Tokyo, and Kyushu. More than 450 part-time workers were laid off. The financial damage ran to more than $20 million. Pocky, one of Japan's most recognizable snacks, disappeared from stores for months. And the monster with 21 faces had accomplished something remarkable. They had brought a major corporation to its knees without receiving a single yen. They repeated the tactic. Over the following months, extortion letters arrived at House Foods Corporation, Marudai Ham, Fujiya, and Morinaga. The formula was always the same. We have poisoned your products, pay us, or we go public. Police coordinated monitored cash drops in response to several of the demands. The group almost always spotted the surveillance and withdrew before any contact. Then, in October of 1984, the operation escalated from threats into something real. Packages of candy were found on the shelves of supermarkets across Japan. Each one was labeled in typewritten Japanese. Danger contains poison. You'll die if you eat this. The monster with 21 faces. A total of 21 packages were recovered at 20 locations, in 2 waves, October 1984 and February 1985. Every package tested positive for lethal concentrations of potassium cyanide. They had actually done it. Whoever these people were, they had put poison into shops where children bought snacks on the way home from school. The panic was immediate and nationwide. Entire aisles of packaged food went unsold. The phrase, monster with 21 faces, entered the national vocabulary. Over the 17 months of their campaign, the group sent more than 100 letters to companies, to police departments, to newspapers, taunting investigators, announcing their next moves, and berating what they repeatedly called idiot police. The monster with 21 faces operated with a sophistication that left investigators constantly one step behind. The kidnapping itself was precise. They had done reconnaissance. They knew the layout of the properties, the family structure, which door led where. The advance entry into the mother's home to retrieve the key to the son's was a detail that revealed planning. The weapons, real or not, prevented any resistance. The 3-day detention suggested a prepared facility. The letters that followed were equally careful. They were typewritten rather than handwritten, eliminating graphological analysis. The paper and ink were standard, available at any stationer's. No fingerprints were ever lifted. But the voice in the letters was distinctive, theatrical, sardonic, confident, with a personality that remained consistent across more than 100 messages. It read like someone who had thought deeply about how they wanted to be perceived. The name they chose told you something. Monster with 21 Faces was a deliberate echo of The Fiend with 20 Faces. The master of disguise villain from Edogawa Rampo's beloved detective novels, which any Japanese reader of a certain generation would have encountered as a child. They were not only committing crimes, they were casting themselves as characters in a story, with Japan as their audience. The closest police came to catching them was on November 14, 1984, in Shiga Prefecture. A surveillance operation had been mounted for a cash delivery related to an extortion demand on house foods. An agent spotted a man near a telephone booth. A golf cap, glasses, and what officers later described as sharp, fox-like eyes. The man appeared to notice he was being watched. He walked away calmly, without running. About an hour later, a Shiga Prefecture officer found a station wagon parked with its engine running and lights off. Through the window, he could see the driver, the same narrow-eyed man, wearing headphones connected to a wireless receiver, monitoring the police frequencies. The instant the driver registered the officer's approach, he accelerated away. The station wagon was recovered near a rail station, abandoned. It had been stolen. In January 1985, police released a composite sketch of what they called the Fox-Eyed Man. It became one of the decade's most circulated police images in Japan. Over the course of the investigation, more than 125,000 people were formally questioned. At the manhunt's peak, roughly 44,000 officers were mobilized. Police knocked on an estimated 3.2 million doors in the Osaka area alone. No arrest followed. The obvious motive, money, doesn't fully hold up. Over 17 months, the monster with 21 faces designed and executed a campaign that terrorized Japan's food industry, generated national headlines, and, by all accounts, never resulted in them actually collecting the ransoms they demanded. They received nothing. So what was the point? Investigators pursued a labor dispute angle. Izaki Glico had a history of contentious union activity in the mid-1970s. A man named Manabu Miyazaki, an Osaka figure with connections to the city's underworld and a documented record of protest actions specifically against Glico in 1975 and 1976, became the investigation's primary suspect. He reportedly bore a physical resemblance to the fox-eyed man in the composite sketch. Police also noted what they described as similarities in phrasing and tone between a labor action recording Miyazaki had made in 1976 and the distinctive voice of the monster's letters. Miyazaki was interviewed extensively. He denied any involvement. He provided alibi accounts for the dates and locations in question. No physical evidence ever connected him to the kidnapping, the arson, or the cyanide packages. He was never charged. It's possible the perpetrators intended to collect money and simply couldn't. It's possible the campaign was orchestrated by an organized criminal group leveraging a labor grievance. It's possible the original goal shifted as the operation grew and the attention itself became the reward. None of these theories was ever confirmed. No insider has ever come forward. No deathbed confession has ever surfaced. What the monster with 21 faces left behind is less a crime file and more a script, and that in itself is revealing. This is interpretive commentary, not a clinical diagnosis, but the behavioral pattern is striking. Almost every extortionist group of that era operated in the shadows. No more communication than necessary, no media engagement, no theatrical flourishes. The monster with 21 faces did the exact opposite. They named themselves after fiction. They wrote to newspapers. They announced their moves in advance. They mocked police by name in their letters. They sent more than 100 messages when silence would have been safer. That pattern suggests people for whom the spectacle was at least as important as the outcome. Perhaps more so. The fear they generated, the front-page coverage, the humiliation of the investigation, the sense of running circles around the authorities. These may have been the real rewards. The ransom was a pretext. The audience was the actual target. The decision to place real cyanide in retail stores is the most chilling part of this analysis. Doing so required obtaining restricted chemicals, preparing the packages, entering stores without being identified, and placing products accurately on shelves, all at significant personal risk of exposure. They did this not once, but twice, across 21 packages in 2 separate episodes. That degree of follow-through, at that level of personal risk, suggests either pathological overconfidence or a genuine compulsion to demonstrate that the threats were not theater. And then there is the manner of the ending. On August 7, 1985, Shoji Yamamoto, the 59-year-old superintendent of Shiga Prefecture's police, died. It is reported that he set himself on fire at his home, a final act attributed to the profound shame of the botched November surveillance when the fox-eyed man had slipped through a net specifically laid for him. Yamamoto had overseen that operation. 5 days after his death, the monster with 21 faces sent a letter to the Asahi Shimbun newspaper. The letter mocked Yamamoto by name. It announced that the group would stop. Their stated reason, in the most widely reported account of the letter, was something like this. They decided to give their condolences for Yamamoto's death and to leave the food companies alone. That ending is strange enough to say something. Whatever the monster with 21 faces were, hired muscle, a grievance-driven crew, something we still don't fully understand, they had their own internal code of conduct. A police superintendent's death was not an insignificant event for them. It was, in their logic, a sufficient conclusion. That kind of thinking doesn't fit the profile of a straightforwardly financial criminal. It fits the profile of someone who had decided they were a protagonist in a story, and who chose, in the end, the moment they wanted that story to close. Japan's statute of limitations ran out on the kidnapping of Katsuhisa Ezaki sometime in the mid-1990s. The limitations on the poisoning-related charges expired around the year 2000. That same year, after 16 years, and what had become one of the most exhaustive and costly investigations in Japanese police history, the official probe was formally closed. Not solved. Closed. The case reshaped Japan's food industry permanently. Companies rewrote their crisis management and product tampering protocols. Retail chains updated their surveillance systems. Food packaging security changed. The case also inspired a generation of crime fiction, most notably the novelist Kaoru Takamura, whose Lady Joker drew directly on the Glico Morinaga incident's themes of corporate power, organized crime, and institutional complicity, and won the Naoki Prize, one of Japan's highest literary honors. But it is Shoji Yamamoto who stays with you, a career public servant who spent the last chapter of his professional life chasing a ghost, who felt the weight of a single failure so completely that he couldn't carry it forward. He was the only confirmed death tied to the case, not a direct victim of the monster with 21 faces, but a casualty of the investigation itself. The monster with 21 faces terrorized Japan's food industry, cost hundreds of workers their jobs, placed real poison in grocery stores, and sent more than 100 letters mocking the people trying to stop them. Then they walked away. They named themselves after a character from a children's novel, played a 17-month game against the entire Japanese police apparatus, and won by simply disappearing. That composite sketch, the fox-eyed man with the golf cap and the narrow features, is still on file. It is the closest the investigation ever came to a face. And that face still has no name. Thanks for watching. If this case stayed with you, subscribe and come back next time, because some crimes don't end with an arrest. Sometimes the most disturbing thing is the silence that fills the space where answers should be.